Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland, Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland, Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Victoria Walsh. Victoria is the founder of Victoria Walsh Coaching and Consulting, working with individuals, teams, and businesses to grow and transform so they can be successful whilst maintaining a healthy and meaningful life. What's unique about Victoria is how she employs her coaching skills to help her clients find their why, empowering them to achieve transformation, which will bring more effectiveness and satisfaction to their careers. And be sure to listen to the end, where Victoria shares with us some tips on building a successful team to ensure your business has the right people to continue to grow. So whether you're interested in knowing more about executive coaching, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Victoria Walsh, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Victoria, I'm really excited about this conversation because I've always been fascinated by this concept of coaching someone so that they can become a better version of themselves. And I think our listeners can learn a lot from your expertise in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So Victoria, where did you grow up?
Oh, hi, Amir. So I actually was born around the Kingston area, but I grew up in the wonderful green areas of Winchester in Hampshire before I returned back to Kingston to go to university, where I studied business studies.
So you went to university
I've been in the area
in Kingston?
for a while. I went to Kingston, up at Kingston Hill. It seems quite a while ago, but yeah, I studied business studies. It was a 4-year course, of which I got to spend 2 periods of time out in industry, 2 6-month periods. So in fact, having left to go to university and come to the Kingston area, I didn't really go back to Winchester after I was 18 because I was literally always working between the holidays for the summer holidays. So I feel as if I've been in Kingston for a long time. I've moved around a little bit into Richmond areas and Tooting, but come back always seems to be to the Kingston area.
It's a nice part of the world, isn't it?
It's just so well connected, I think. We've got ease into London, but then also out to the south where my parents are. And then also just with Bushy Park, it's just so beautiful to just have that greenery and that outdoor space.
Absolutely. I very much second that. Could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you set up your business?
Yeah, so I graduated, I won't say how long ago, but it was a fair while, and left Kingston Business School with a business studies degree, but with a desire to go into marketing. I'd done my placements, both of my placements in marketing. So I got the sort of bug of wanting to get involved in more sort of a creative industry. I was always fascinated by behavior, and my dissertation had been on sort of consumer behavior. So I stepped into the world of marketing, into the agency world. So I was lucky to have a good sort of 20 years of working in marketing. And within that time, I had the great experience of lots of different roles and lots of different brands as I went up this sort of ladder, as they used to call it, within that industry. I had a couple of experiences where I wasn't working agency side. So when it was agency, it's very much consultancy and client service work. But I also worked for Sony Pictures for a period of time and Nokia sort of as interim marketing managers. So I saw both sides of working in sort of small to medium-sized independent businesses, as well as working for more sort of big corporates. I'd say probably 10 years in to my marketing career was when I started to get itchy feet. I'd, progressed pretty quickly up to sort of almost board level. I think I was a board director after 12 years of starting. And I just felt as if something was missing, but I didn't really know what it was. And I tried changing my role a little bit within the agencies I worked in. I sort of stepped more into operational roles. Although I was still client servicing and had some great clients and I was a strategic marketeer at heart, I was starting to get very much more involved in the processes that kept businesses going in the sense of producing quality work, and that would retain staff, improve employee engagement, boost teams, all of this type of stuff. And as I sort of came to the end of my agency career, I was more sort of MD level, very much focused on business direction and leadership and team motivation and getting the most out of people. So it sort of felt like a natural transition by the time I sort of decided that I wanted to do something else. But it wasn't a quick decision. It, as I say, it was a good 10 years sort of going until I made that step. And it was definitely sort of a good sort of 2 to 3 years from saying, right, I do want to change, but what do I want to do? How do I do it? And there was a lot of fear and, hesitation. I had a family. I didn't want to necessarily jump ship to something that I didn't think I would enjoy. So it was a very muddled period of time, sort of 2013, 2014, until I sort of decided definitely 2015 was the year that I would move. I would basically take the big step to run my own business, sort of tap into the entrepreneurial spirit, which I suddenly found I had, which I never really realized I did. But most importantly, to focus on something that would really make my heart sing, like marketing had right at the beginning. And to really, really focus on what I was passionate about by that point in terms of making it easier for people to make the most of themselves within jobs, but also making sure businesses were able to retain and shape and encourage the best out of their staff when they had them in their businesses.
And there's definitely a lot in that I want to unpack throughout this conversation, Victoria. What I find fascinating, though, before we do so, is the different sort of professionals that I've now interviewed in this podcast series that have gone from corporate world to being a partner in or setting up their own business. I'm a case in point, and obviously you are too. So just before we dive into your business as it stands today, what are some of the things you can reflect on today that perhaps you can pull from all of that great training that you no doubt had and that exposure you had through the big corporate world down to a local business that you now run yourself?
I think one fundamental thing, and because my business has two halves in the sense that it focuses a lot on career coaching as well as the corporate sort of training and performance development and exec coaching. So from a career sort of point of view, from my experience, having been stuck or felt very, very low, uninspired, bored, trapped were words that I used, knowing that that's what can happen when you sort of get into your comfort zone, or when you sort of hit a slump, when things aren't necessarily igniting you, but knowing that there's ways to come out of it and ways that I wish I'd known earlier, that definitely helps me today, and definitely at the beginning of my business when I was really attracting people that had been in very similar situations to me. So from a point of view, understanding what it's like when you hit that sort of that block, knowing what it feels like, but also knowing how you can do it definitely helps me now. In terms of the other side of it, being in a leadership position within businesses that we're sort of, I think the smallest agency I ever worked in was about 12 people. The largest, and my last one that I was working in, I was co-running the UK division of a global business, which had, I think it was about 50 people in London and about another 25, 30 in Swansea. So I understand a lot of the logistical issues of running sort of multi-site teams. The businesses that I've often worked for have had very young people involved in them because, marketing is quite it was in my day, a very young business. And so a lot of the time you're having to train people on the job. And literally there were a lot of issues in terms of maybe cross teams. I had to, understand, different leadership styles were required for different types of people within the business. So in terms of creatives versus account handlers, so client service people, versus those people who might be more on the planning side, who were sort of more, in a sense, wanting to be intellectually stimulated or left to their own devices. So in terms of adapting leadership styles, but also recognizing that, running a business and managing teams is very different to just literally being in a team. So in terms of the pressures of having the whole, important elements of growing your business, but also making sure that your teams are not only functioning properly, but they're also feeling like they want to be with you for the long term. Because obviously cost of recruitment and cost of, bringing people in and then training them to be more like you is such an important thing. I think the other thing, and this is one of the things that underpins my business, is communication. How important communication is in every aspect of our business, or of any business, in the sense that, poor communication can make and break, can't make and break, or will break the best teams that you can have out there. And it also communication from a career point of view. If you don't talk to people about the fact that you're not enjoying your work, if you're not honest with people that the fact that the work that somebody's giving you isn't stimulating, or that you're not growing in your job, you're never going to basically be able to come out the other side. So, there's lots of things that I think that I can pull on that literally makes me the type of coach that I am today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let's start unpacking a couple of those bits for our listeners there, Victoria. So firstly, on the side of your business that deals with career coaching, could you tell our listeners a bit about the work you do on that front and how that can make them feel, say, more fulfilled in their work life?
Okay, so I basically pitch the fact that my role is very much, and it doesn't really make much difference if it's for the career side of it or the corporate performance related stuff. It's all about basically making every day a best day, because I passionately believe that we're here for this period of time that we're on earth, and that we shouldn't spend lots of it not enjoying what we do, or feeling energy out of what we're doing, or not feeling as if we can be the best version of ourselves. So from a career coaching point of view, I very much see myself as being able to help people create confident changes that bring greater career satisfaction. So that every day that they're feeling that they're on the right path, that they're in the right job, and that they're heading somewhere, and that they're heading towards something that is more fulfilling, that has purpose, and brings them the rewards that they need. So that might not necessarily be money. It might not necessarily be anything that we think from a materialistic point of view. But I find that people have very clear, and you unpick it, have very clear motivating reasons that they get up and go to work. A lot of people balance. A lot of people, it is about basically finding some level of purpose in what they're doing. I think when I unpicked my own, that was what was happening with me. I wasn't getting excited, didn't feel much purpose about discussing cartons of juice or mobile phones anymore. Whereas knowing every day that I go to work to help somebody untap their best version of themselves and become something that they really ultimately want to be, but just didn't know how to be, for me, that's really important.
Could you tell our listeners a little bit about your work on that front? And also, if you have any tips for our business owner listeners in particular, that perhaps they should bear in mind when they're expanding and their teams and growing their existing teams.
Okay. So when it comes for what I sort of say is my executive coaching and then my performance-based training and coaching, this is very much about the fact that I work with either people on their own within organizations, or mostly with teams and leaders, to help them untap their best performing self. So to find the abilities that they may have lost because something may have happened in the organization that's put them out of sync, or just simply because actually over time they've stopped learning and changing and the world around them has changed. Or it just simply may be the fact that they're just operating in a different way now and need to find different things, different strategies in order to perform, to be better communicators, to be better leaders, to build those stronger relationships. And for me, it's all about basically helping them make that best day by being the best performer that they can be. So to have the energy and to have the skills and the mindset to bring the best out of themselves. As I say, the type of things that I will work with people on is a lot of times it's to do with teamwork. So creating more collaborative and cohesive teams, and also on building relationships and communication. So when it comes to actually thinking about your people, I think, number one, you want to make sure you're employing the right people. So in terms of that, it's about basically making sure that you understand exactly what jobs you need to fulfill. So doing some form of analysis, needs analysis, job analysis, as it is, in terms of what it is that you need somebody to come in and do. And then using that information to really work out how you should find that person and who exactly they are. So in terms of really sort of breaking down a role, and then also thinking about, the type of person that will fit within your culture. So understanding your culture, doing an element of analysis of the culture is always important. And then also in terms of the people that you've already got. Now, I do a lot of work with assessment tools with people. I've been accredited in a number of tools, and actually later this month and next month, I'm doing some further accreditation for occupational ability and personality tests, because I really am quite passionate about this area, about making sure that not only people work out where they should be, but that employers are definitely recruiting the right people, because job satisfaction leads to greater productivity. It ensures that people are happier in the workplace, which obviously affects their well-being, and then it also helps people build those stronger relationships. If you feel aligned with the organization you're in, if you feel you're right for that job, and an organization also feels that, then it's a win-win situation. So that would be my first thing, to really analyze what you want someone to do in order to then work out who that person should be.
And that's fascinating, I think, Victoria, actually, in particular with regards to that personality setting of things. I wonder if there's something there, only because I've seen this in our own firm, having hired, 3 different, pretty much key people in the last year and a half. There's an element as well of setting expectations, isn't there? There's an element of understanding that a person's personality requires a certain induction process. It requires a certain way for you to get them on a roll type thing, and not just expecting that sort of the company handbook will do the job. There is a side to it. There is something in there, isn't there, that I'm sure when you're working with teams in the way you do, you bring that out because you you take people through exercises that, if nothing else, helps them discover something in themselves.
Yeah, I think the importance, a lot of the work I do with teams is getting people to understand each other, because it's fine to basically focus on you as an individual and to say, okay, this is your natural behavior style. This is the way that you usually perform in this type of situation. And for people to say, okay, that's the type of person, I'm quite a dominant person, or I'm quite an influential person, or I'm quite an independent person. That's my natural style. But actually, what can you do with that information? You have to, you can't just basically walk into a room and say, oh, well, I'm not going to do that because actually I'm not very good at detail. So you have to basically therefore think about everybody else that's in the room, or everyone else in the teams or in the whole business, and say, okay, so how am I different to that person? Why is it that person always asks me for so much information? It makes me feel as if I'm always basically not necessarily not ready to take a risk, because I always want to basically understand lots and lots of information. And that can create frustrations. Or why is it that person, seems to be very, very, very quiet, and, doesn't seem to really have the energy in the room? Rather than just having those questions, what, you want to do is say, well, if I'm this type of person, if this is my normal behavior style, what is that person around my board table or my team table? What is it that makes them tick? What is it that they need in order to feel comfortable and safe? And that's the whole thing, the psychological safety within organizations. In the sense that, some people need different things and different stuff to energize them. And when we have that information, once we learn it about ourselves, and then we say, okay, so what are the different styles of people? What are the different personalities? Then you can start to say, okay, how can I stretch? How can I flex? And what can I do in order to make that feel comfortable for me? And that's a really interesting discussion that often can happen in team sessions, when people have this sort of eureka moment of understanding that actually the reason they're not collaborating is because they're quite different. And actually, if they just learned a little bit about how to communicate better with each other, by understanding their natural personalities and behavior, then actually they're one step closer to building that trust level and that collaboration in order to get better results.
That's really
So I think you're right about expectations. I think that from all of us, we shouldn't expect everything that we would do for the other person to do, if you understand. I think if I look back, I am a classic in DISC. I'm a classic C in the sense that I'm very conscientious. So that means that I'm very detailed. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I'm very focused on, making sure that everything is trickle checked and everything. And I'm sure when I was managing lots of my teams in years gone past, they used to moan galore and not understand about why I was constantly getting them to redo something or to double check something. But at the same time, I can remember getting frustrated with people for not having that level of attention to detail. But it doesn't come naturally to some people, or it becomes a little bit in the fact that, I wasn't necessarily a big risk taker in my early stage of my career. I've had to change that. Now I'm a bit more now I've got my own business. But, I was paired in my last agency as a sort of double act with somebody who was a real risk taker. So, I would be there as the voice of reason, whereas he would be the risk-taking sort of ideas person saying, but I would be there to back it up if, we needed data or anything like that. So it is about really sort of managing those expectations of your own behaviors and making sure that, you think, okay, is this actually right for everybody else? What I'm doing right now, actually, for my own personal development, because that's one of the other things I've learned across my career, is that you should constantly be investing in your own personal development. I came from an industry that actually, it was all the on-the-job training. We didn't necessarily send people out for training. And what I've been doing, obviously, since I transitioned into my role as an independent business consultant and trainer and executive coach, is I've been investing a lot in mine in terms of exec coaching certifications, a lot of these assessment profiling tools that I use. But I'm also currently at Kingston University doing a master's in occupational business psychology, because actually what really, really excites me is that sort of the psychological reasons that we do things, or what stops us doing things. And that very much, I think, is potentially why I'm a little bit different, even without necessarily completing the master's yet, why I'm a bit different as a consultant and an executive coach in terms of what I do.
Victoria, in thinking about your specialism around career development in particular, where you coach your clients to feel more fulfilled in their work life, could you give us a few examples of the work you've done on this front, so our listeners can understand a bit more how this might play out for them?
Yeah, career coaching is, it's where my business really started, and it's where a lot of people come to me from. A lot of people are coming as referrals. Majority of the people that I have coached from a career point of view have been what I call sort of like mid-career individuals. So usually sort of 38 plus, who have hit a slump or got bored, or just simply just thought, do you know what, I need to just check I'm in the right place. I'm okay, but could I be doing something else? There is that sort of, don't like to use the word midlife crisis, because I don't think it is a crisis. I think it's very much about liberation, midlife liberation, where we suddenly realize that we've got loads and loads of skills and things that we didn't realize that we would ever have. And then we've also got the whole idea of the fact that we've got life experiences, and we realize that actually life is more than just going to work and doing a job that we don't necessarily like. So I have people sort of doing check-ins on where they are as well. Somebody very recently worked with me because actually he was basically feeling that he was coming towards a period that would be the last time that he would be changing, and he wanted to make sure that it was the right change. He felt as if, he wanted more, he didn't use the word purpose, but wanted something that would be more of a legacy. And so we looked at what it was that, he felt that was missing, that wasn't allowing him to create that legacy where he was, where he felt he needed to actually move to a completely different company. And at some points he was talking about into a completely different career direction. And because that can sometimes happen, people can come to me and say, oh, I want to change career, it's not for me. And, when we actually pick it all apart, we realize actually it's not necessarily changing career completely. It's just doing more of certain aspects. I'm a classic changer in the sense that I've taken aspects of my job into a different industry. But there's lots of people that I know that I work with that literally just do more of the things they like, but in their same industry. And this is what's happened with this recent client of mine. He's doing now more of the things that he really wanted to do. He's an HR professional, actually, but he's doing lots more of the stuff that he wants to do, but in a company that he feels more inspired with, in a role that he feels that he can create more influence and leave a mark on, so that when he looks back, and we always use this in coaching, when he sits back on his rocking chair in his 90s, he can say, that's what I was really proud of.
Victoria, what are some of the key business lessons you've learned throughout your life?
I think that for me, I think it is about the fact that we have to lead ourselves. We have to develop our own self-leadership and take responsibility for what happens in our careers and in our teams, that we can go around pointing a finger and blaming a situation or other people. But the only thing that can change, or the only person that can change a situation, is us. And that's the way that we think about something, but also the actions that we have. So it is all about basically learning the right mindset and the right self-leadership tools, right strategies that will help you inspire and influence positive steps versus basically sitting back and feeling lost or feeling as if everybody else has control over our destiny. I also think I touched on it just a minute ago, that it's always best to start with the why and not the how, because this is where you'll find that motivation and ensures that you're focusing on the right things. So many times I remember in business where, people come up with these great new ideas, we implement them and, expect changes because it was a great idea and it sounded great on paper, or we saw somebody else doing it. And then only to find that teams didn't work better, weren't more cohesive, or weren't more motivated, and our retention levels didn't change. And that's because we didn't spend time necessarily or on focusing on the needs analysis of exactly what was needed and what was wrong. We jumped too quickly into the how. And I think the other thing is communication. I've worked in a number of organizations where we've, and I've been part of it in the sense of we've had closed communication, and that creates anxiety. And right now, if we think about the situation that we're in with COVID, the more we can develop strong communication systems within our businesses, the better things are going to be, because the more we're talking, the more open we are, the more honest we are, we can build that trust amongst teams, between leadership teams, and between a whole business. And also, especially when we're working remotely, we can sometimes forget that people can feel isolated and feel anxious because they don't understand what's going on. So literally communicating and understanding that people need to hear from you more often than you actually probably think. I don't think I've ever had anyone that's over communicated and being criticized for it. You always just hear about poor communication. So I think, communication is one of those things that I really stress to my clients. And I know that, when I was running business, that it was something that we tried to really focus on, so that everybody felt part of something, but also no one was behind doors gossiping or panicking over the state of the business, or trying to work out what was wrong with what they were doing. So feedback from a communication point of view. So yeah, there's three things there.
When you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I think that I have sustained a career, to be honest with you, in the sense that we've had a few recessions. I think, I was able to have children. I've got a 12-year-old and 10-year-old now. And I was able to maintain a very senior marketing career when they were very young. So I'm very proud of that. And then also transitioning and stepping out of a comfort zone of being within an environment where I was part of a big team to now working on my own is something. And to just continually be learning. These are things that I feel really proud of, to feel that I have that determination and the ability to keep feeding my knowledge and a desire to achieve. I never consider myself to be really, really ambitious, but I think I've actually got more ambition than I realized when I look back and start thinking about how I have invested in my own personal development, and the steps I've taken along my career to make sure that it's been sustainable, and that I've continued to grow in that career and do things that I enjoy.
That's great. Victoria, what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline you can tell us about?
So right now, obviously, I'm continuing to work with my current clients. So we're doing a lot of work with career coaching and exec coaching online. I work with Kingston University. I work as part of their business readiness team for their undergraduates, and I'm just about to embark on lots of mentoring of consultancy projects. So teams basically are getting experience by working on local Kingston businesses. I think a few of them are, in terms of as a consultancy, to get that great work experience or to develop great skills that employers are going to want when they're graduating. So that's going to keep me busy for a bit in the summer. One of the things I did last week was I spoke on a webinar for an organization that had asked me to come and talk about resilience, but also how leaders can support their teams coming back to work in the terms of managing well-being and anxiety and helping them to be resilient through this lockdown as we come out of it. And interestingly, from that, I think there's going to be some additional work in the sense of doing some leadership training, so that people can look at how they can develop their styles. And then also in terms of some teamwork, sort of to help people sort of feel as if they're together, even if they're going to end up being remote for a little bit. And then, as I said, I'm doing this master's, which is taking up a lot of time. But through that, I am able to do this additional work in terms of learning and getting accredited in these occupational ability and personality tests, which will mean that in the longer term, maybe in the next 6 months, I'll be able to sort of work not just on literally help using these with current work that I'm doing in terms of the career and the organizational work with teams, but also in terms of helping people think about the selection process. So when we talked about that whole thing about finding the right people, looking at making sure that the right people are being recruited so that we're limiting, someone can limit the risk of mispredicting the performance of somebody. So it's all very exciting.
Exciting times ahead indeed. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So Victoria, What do you do to relax outside of the office?
Okay, so relaxing, I like to read a lot. I read lots of different things. So I like reading fictional novels. I also like read quite a lot of Brené Brown books, so self-development books that are linked to what I do, but also, interest me in terms of subjects like vulnerability and personality. I like to do a bit of yoga, and I have a dog, so I love to go to Bushy Park and walk the dog. Which is fantastic right now in terms of being able to get out into that space and stretch the legs, but also, have that me time of just walking the dog, listening to podcasts, which is another pastime of mine.
Excellent. And are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I'd recommend the latest from Brené Brown. And if people don't know who she is, she's a psychologist and is somebody who did a fantastic TED Talk a few years ago, and you can find it on YouTube, on vulnerability. But she created a book recently called Dare to Lead. And whatever she does is always very thought-provoking and full of compassion. And this was specifically about becoming a courageous leader and doing that by admitting that you don't know all the answers, and then having that sort of willingness to be vulnerable with your team and able to have difficult conversations so that you're really creating an authentic connection as it is. And in that way, being able to get people on board to influence them and maximize potential. So it's a really interesting book. And in fact, there's a Netflix, I think it's an hour-long program that she does talking about this whole subject. So if people want to see that as well, it's really worthwhile.
That's right up my street. And I have been following her for a few years, and I definitely second the fact that she has some very, very interesting material to read on. Apart from that one, are there any other movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
So I've been watching Normal People on BBC, which I've read the book. I read the book last year, and it was a fantastic book. So I was interested to see how this would transfer, and I was hoping it wouldn't disappoint, and it definitely hasn't disappointed. It's really captivating, and it's been delivered really well by some young actors and actresses. It's a bit of a coming of age story, and it sort of does take you back to reminiscing when you were young. It's really interesting. I'd say to people to watch that. I'm also one of the, I do love a little bit of Netflix. One of the things that I love watching is some of the sort of 22 minutes US comedies. So things like it's Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think it is. Sort of just stuff that you can just quickly, put on, after dinner for 22 minutes. That's really great. And I'm really sad to see that Homeland's finished, because something like that, where you really sort of can get involved in after series. So, I know that some people gave up on Homeland a few years ago. I know my husband did, and I've been saying to him, you've got to get back into it because it becomes better again. So that's the type of thing that I'm watching.
Excellent. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
My website is www.victoriawalshcoaching.co.uk, and they can also link in with me on LinkedIn. Just find me under Victoria Walsh.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add these resources to the show notes. Victoria, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.